Some people just know they could save hundreds on car insurance by checking Allstate first. Like, to check the Jumbotron first, before attempting to eat a stack of Supreme nachos in one bite. Now you're just a meme that everyone shares on game day. Checking first is smart, so check Allstate first for a quote that could save you hundreds. You're in good hands with Allstate. Savings vary, subject to terms, conditions, and availability. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates, Northbrook, Illinois.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed Sponsored Jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
We may live over 5,000 miles from Lincoln Financial Field, but what we lack in proximity, we make up for in film study. And each and every week, we'll be bringing you in-depth film breakdowns from across the pond and the Sooner State. Welcome to On the Shane Page. I am your host, Shane Haff. You can follow me on Twitter at ShaneHaffNFL. And I'm joined by BGN's own film guru, Jonny Page. Give him a follow on Twitter at JohnnyPage9. Johnny, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing well. Wife's still very pregnant, so I set aside a lot of time yesterday to grind some film, and I was ready. I stopped my draft stuff. I was like, let's go. Who are the Eagles going to sign? And I spent half an hour watching Kenyon Green and then thought, I think I've seen enough. I'll hope something happens today before the show, and something has not happened today before the show. So I guess today will be probably talking about who's left more than who's joined. But yeah, it's quite nice to see Eagles Twitter back in meltdown. It's always nice to see a good old-fashioned meltdown. Like we love it on Philly Twitter. And I feel like it's a full meltdown yesterday over Harry Roseman.
It's so like the whole thing.
But yeah.
It's like the whole thing where it's been 0 days since the last Eagles Twitter meltdown. I totally thought when you were about to say, like, my wife's very pregnant and I was going to watch all these guys. And then I thought you were going to be like, but then she went into labor, and so she's at the hospital, and we're here to record the show. And thought we were about to take a turn there.
I'm sorry, but it's Kenyon Green. The people need to hear my thoughts on Kenyon Green. My favorite thing about Kenyon Green is just half the replies saying, "Oh, Stoutland's got this. Stoutland's got this." I'm like, Stoutland's not like the real life god. I love the comments about Stoutland in my Twitter. It's hilarious. Is he going to fix him? I'm like, I mean, he'll try. He might just not be very good, but it does make me laugh. Stoutland's awesome. As I said just down with Discord to you, why do you hate Stoutland? Because you just mentioned the idea he might not actually be able to save this guy. But
believe it or not, there are human beings that Jeff Stoutland could not make into starting offensive linemen in the NFL. I mean, I'll go ahead and say I'm one of them. I'm pretty sure Jeff Stoutland couldn't turn me into an offensive lineman. He couldn't turn Andre Dillard into an offensive lineman, but we'll get into Kenyon Green. My favorite moment of yesterday was tweeting that I guess it's time to watch some Kenyon Green film ? And the amount of Texans fans that replied to me and were like, don't bother, was hilarious. But yeah, so we're going to get into free agency. There's no acquisitions to talk about for the Eagles, really, in terms of signing free agents. But we'll talk through the process of some of the guys they lost, a little bit of where we're at right now. We'll do just real briefly a little bit of Kenyon Green film at Johnny's insistence. And we also want to take a look around the division at the rest of the NFC East and see what the Commanders, the Giants, and the Cowboys have done. We're not going to get a whole lot into the Zach Bond contract. We did that last week, although that was a Patreon show. Go join our Patreon, patreon.com/ontheshame page. We did a film review of Zach Bond and talked about his contract. We also threaded that needle of doing a Myles Garrett film review while there was like, oh, the Eagles are going to sign him, which was like 2 days before it was like, oh, the Eagles actually don't have any cap space at all, neither of which is true. But we threaded the needle with that one and just drooled over Myles Garrett. So you can see that and a lot more stuff in our patreon.com/ontheshane page. There's a lot of cool perks there. Go join that. Come hang out in our Discord with us. But Jonny, shall we dive into what the Eagles have been doing in free agency?
Yes. Before we start with who's left, the Discord has been absolutely flying. If you want proper good Eagles talk, the Discord is awesome. I get basically all my news there as well, which is good fun. What is your because basically we have a cap guy, if Jimbo's listening. Jimbo's like our resident Discord cap expert at this point, and I'm learning way more about the cap than I ever knew, so it shows how little I knew, which is always good. Basically, the general consensus is that everyone online is talking too much about the Eagles saving money for the future years, and actually that's not really a big concern. So just big picture, before we get into who they've lost, because I think sometimes people can look really philosophically at this, like, oh, Howie is losing all these players because he doesn't want to repeat the last mistake. And I'm like, maybe he just couldn't afford and didn't want to pay Milton Williams $26 million a year. Like, maybe he did want him back, actually. Maybe he did want Josh Sweat back. He just had a price and they went above the price. I sometimes think we can get a little bit too philosophical on things, but what is your big picture takeaway of what the Eagles are trying to achieve in the first couple of days? And obviously we are still very early on, so the Eagles could make a very big trade, the Eagles could make a big signing still, who knows what will happen. But do you have a general thought on what they are trying to accomplish, or do you think it's maybe just as simple as players are getting paid more than they were willing to pay them?
Yeah, I think it's been fascinating to watch everybody want to trade multiple first-round picks for Myles Garrett and then give him a huge contract extension and think the Eagles can afford that, to now a few days later being like, the Eagles are basically the Saints and they're in salary cap hell. And they're not. The Eagles salary cap's fine. They're 22nd in the league right now in cap space, which isn't high, but they have one of the best rosters in the NFL. You don't want to have the most salary cap space in the NFL. That's the Patriots, the Chargers, the Cardinals, the Titans. That's the caliber of teams. The Eagles have a better roster than they should for the cap space they have. And a lot of people have pivoted to the Eagles are doing this to free up room for the Jalen Carter extension because he's going to make $40 million a year. And even if that were the actual number, if the Eagles paid Jalen Carter $40 million a year, one, it would be an extension that would kick in the 2027 season because he's got 2 years left on his rookie deal. And two, how he would structure the deal, just like he did the Saquon deal. Saquon's was 3 years at $14 million a year, and he hit the cap the first year for $3 million. And so even if they paid Jalen Carter $40 million a year, it wouldn't hit the cap until 2027 when it would be $6 to $8 million. And so I think that's overblown. I think people are just trying to make sense of it. And honestly, I think a lot of the guys the Eagles have lost have made sense. And we'll get into these guys and talk about the numbers and where we're at. But I just think that, there's a couple things I would have done differently, but for the most part, I wouldn't have paid Milton Williams $104 million. He's not even the best lineman on the Eagles. So I wouldn't have paid him that. I wouldn't have paid Josh Sweat $19 million a year to disappear for 2.5 months at a time. I would have loved both of those guys back, but I wouldn't have even dreamed of touching the numbers that they got on the open market. So to me, I think that, we said all along that Williams and Sweat were gone. Zach Bond would be back and Becton we would see. And that's kind of where we're at. And so I think what really has shaken people is the Chauncey Gardner-Johnson move, which I just don't think that was a football move. I don't think that was a football move or a financial move. I think that was a get Chauncey Gardner-Johnson out of the building move for behind the scenes reasons. And I'm not I don't have a source that's whispering that in my ear. I'm not trying to slander Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, but he's on his 5th team in 5 years now. And there's a pattern there. And that's really the only thing that makes sense. It wasn't about a financial thing. I think they wanted him gone.
Yeah, should we let's just start getting into it then. We'll start with a Chauncey Gardner-Johnson move. Not technically a free agency move, but we'll start with a trade. He's a weird guy. He's a weird player as well. I'll be honest, that move shocked me a little bit. There's a lot of things going around Twitter, and you can see big plays the Eagles have made this year when Chauncey Gardner-Johnson hits the guy and Sirianni's charging up the field to hit him. and they're like loving life. And he's obviously a bit of a divisive figure in the locker room. I think NFL locker rooms are interesting places, and if you want to only take nice guys, you'll struggle a lot, sadly. You have to have a little bit of a balance as long as you can manage them, and that's part of, I guess, having a good culture, is that you can handle these kind of players. But I also think if you're going to handle idiots, they better be extremely good. And he's not extremely good. In fact, at points last year, he was outright bad. And we spoke about benching him halfway through the season. And if the Eagles had a proper backup, I think he may have got benched. I think Chauncey's a weird player because people assume, a lot of people just say the same things every year. Oh, he's a versatile safety, former cornerback, therefore can play in coverage. But like, he can't really. He wasn't really very good in coverage at all. If anything, the best moments he had last year were 4th and short, 3rd and 1, coming downhill, hitting hard. He actually, the way I see people talk about him, like the way I've seen Texans fans speak about him, is not really what I think he actually does for this team. Like his man coverage in the red zone last year was atrocious, basically every single time. So yes, granted, you could say, well, Reed Blankenship isn't trusted to man up with those players. And I agree. The fact is Chauncey is trusted because he can do it. But you know what? I'd almost rather he wasn't asked to do it because he didn't do it very well. So versatility is a weird thing. I sometimes think it's overrated if you're not really good at everything. Like, yes, he can technically man up, but he wasn't actually very good at it. His play, though, is energy. Coming downhill, if the defense is low and they need a vibe, he sparks a vibe. He's the kind of player that can turn things around. I think the Eagles maybe have 3 of those on their defense, or did have 3 in him, Jalen Carter, and Zach Bourne. Doesn't mean he was the 3rd best defensive player. Don't get me wrong, he was not. But there are games when things aren't going your way, and sometimes you need someone just to stand up and hit someone and do something. He was that kind of player who would just seemingly make a big play at a big moment. And I think it depends how philosophically you judge like major plays, as someone's just commenting here, Mark. It depends how you define really. Do you want splashy plays or do you want consistency? And the boring truth is you want a bit of both, but consistency is always what defensive coaches want. And I wonder if they just became a little bit fed up of Chauncey missing a few assignments. And I don't think it was because of play, like you said, but there's absolutely no reason his play does not come into this. Like if he was exceptionally good, they would keep him for being an idiot. Like maybe he's fallen out. Maybe he's fallen out with Darius Slay. Like who cares? Slay's not here anyway, apparently. So,
or maybe he is. Like, who knows?
Or maybe he is. Yeah. So who knows at this point? So yeah, I find the Chauncey move a little bit weird. I keep having people tweet me whenever I say the Eagles are going to do something, saying Lewis Sign or whatever his name is, and I'm like, let's just all calm down. Is it Lewis Chine or Sign? How do you pronounce it?
Scene. It's actually pronounced Scene.
There you go. Nailed it. Clearly, you can tell I was really in love with him in the draft in 2022. So Lewis Scene, as we all knew, we haven't really seen a lot. So I think everyone can chill. Sidney Brown, Anthony commenting is going to be fine. Yeah, we'll see. You're talking to the Sidney Browns sort of lovers here, especially Shane, but it wasn't a great year. He's coming off an injury. I think they'll do one more signing in that position. But you can't deny the fact that realistically they got worse. And I'm guessing it was a culture move. And when those kind of moves happen, I hate to be really boring and just say, we don't know what's going on, but we don't know what's going on. There's probably stuff behind the scenes that we will not find out. And sometimes you have to just suck it up and hope that the people in charge know what they're doing. And it's quite a strange trade. They didn't get much in return. It's not like they saved a ton of money, which makes me think that there are things going on that we just simply don't know.
Yeah, what I can tell you is that it didn't save them that much money. And after watching Kenyon Green, it wasn't about acquiring Kenyon Green. So I think it was a get Chauncey out of the building move. And if that's the case, like you said, we don't know what's going on behind the scenes, but he is not the caliber of player that you put up with negatives, like causing issues behind the scene. So that's not to say he's a bad player. I thought he was a bad player at the start of the year in 20. My full arc with Chauncey Gardner-Johnson as an Eagle. I loved him coming out of the draft. I wanted the Eagles to draft him. I was thrilled when they got him in 2022. So I'm not coming from a Chauncey Gardner-Johnson hater perspective. I liked him in the draft. I was thrilled when they got him. I thought he became overrated by Eagles fans in 2022 because of the interceptions, which were largely like deflection, sailed passes sorts of things. I thought he was really bad at the start of the year this year. And then I thought he got better as the season went along. He still struggled in coverage with some busts and things, but he played a good role for the defense. He's he's a fine starting safety in the league. I didn't expect the Eagles to move on to him, but it's not the kind of guy I'm going to get bent out of shape. If Vic Fangio says, I don't want that guy in the building, he's not good enough for me if I'm Howie to push back and say, well, I really want to keep him in the building.
Yeah, and the culture argument's sort of boring for us as analysts because we're like, oh, we don't know. But his play wasn't that good. Especially in man coverage. I would just say as well, just big picture as well on the Chauncey move. I think the idea that the Eagles are like rebuilding is nonsense. And I think of how he is rebuilding. I prefer like retooling as a phrase. I think they might be changing the way they do it. The idea that you would sit down after a Super Bowl season where you are the best team by a mile and think, you know what we need is to not compete next year with Lane Johnson, Saquon Barkley, Jalen Hurts. That is utter nonsense. So that would be a complete travesty, really, if that was the approach they're going. I think they might be looking at more long-term success rather than going all in. And that's okay as a strategy. But the idea that like they're just getting rid of him because it's all about salary and they're waiting for a few years, like that would be utter nonsense. And I would be annoyed at that point. Should we move on to the other moves then? Because we could talk about Chauncey for a while, I guess. Should we hit Milton Williams getting $26 million next from the New England Patriots before you hit a lovely comment from Anthony?
Yeah, real quick. Anthony said, Andrew Brandt said on his podcast, the Eagles have been number one in cash spending and that Howie had to reel that in a bit with all the big contracts coming up. I don't necessarily agree with that. Like, this is why I wasn't on board with the Garrett thing. I think there's a line you want to walk where when you have the best roster in the NFL, I didn't think it made sense to push all your chips into the middle on a Myles Garrett thing right now and tank the future for a win this year thing. But you can also swing too far the other direction of we're going to create a dynasty that lasts 10 years. And I don't think that's what the Eagles are doing here. I will start to have concerns if they do something like cutting Dallas Goedert or trading him for a 6th round pick, because I don't think that makes sense. But I can make sense of everything else that's happened so far. So we'll see. Hopefully the Eagles aren't looking at like the Patriots dynasty and being like, let's create something that'll last 12 years, because that will cause problems. But there's no reason that the Eagles can't have a really good roster and compete without pushing everything in on a guy like Myles Garrett and have a 4 or 5 year window to go win some rings.
Yeah, we've got loads of good comments coming in, by the way. And I would just say we're going to go through outgoings first, then talk about Kenyon NFC East. If you've got any questions, I would say we'll save some time at the end because we're going to rush through this pretty quickly, to be fair, rather than just randomly, because there's a few questions that are good that I want to get back to, but it feels like the random time to talk about them. So maybe we'll save a little bit of time at the end, Shane, to run through a few if they're not related to what we're talking about. I think we can do Milton Williams and Josh Sweat in like one, I guess. Both they're both different, I guess. Milton Williams, very good player, very, very good player. Never really was the guy with the Eagles, never had a high snap count, didn't prove he could play snaps like Jalen Carter. I think the idea that he can't play because he's only good because he's next to Jalen Carter is utter nonsense. And if you've ever watched Milton Williams film over the past 3 years, he's a really, really good football player. And I'm very happy for him that he got paid because I think he's a very good pass rusher and I think he's an average run defender, but I think he's a very useful player. Free agency, people go mad. And the reason why you don't let your players get to their final year is because you basically always lose them. Because the idea that Eagles were going to pay Milton Williams higher than the 3rd highest defensive tackle in the league when they're about to invest in Jalen Carter, when they have Moro Ojomo, who's been good, when they have Thomas Booker, Jordan Davis, who at least can play, and they have high draft picks this year where they could easily add to a defensive tackle rotation. That's not going to happen. So nothing against Milton Williams. I've seen some ridiculous comments about how he's nowhere near worth the money. And actually, it's only because he's next to Jalen Carter. And I just fundamentally disagree with that. I think he's a very, very good football player. I think the Patriots will enjoy having him there. He's probably not going to be worth what they paid for him, but that's what happens in free agency.
And when you're a bad team with more cap space than anybody else in the league, you can overpay for some of those guys. It doesn't matter. Yeah,
that's what happens. You've got loads of cap and the Eagles are not going to spend that much. And then Josh Sweat, I think, is basically very similar. I think the difference between Josh Sweat is, unfortunately, I think Josh Sweat might be a bit of a ticking time bomb with his knee. And I think the Eagles are probably more likely to move on from him. But you're kidding yourself if you don't think the Eagles are going to be worse without Josh Sweat and Milton Williams. Like, they're good players. Both of them can rush the quarterback and they're going to have to be replaced. Everyone knows that's listened to me for a while. I love Ojomo as much as maybe anyone. I think some of the numbers about his pass rushing win rate last year being that high maybe seem to me a little bit like one of those things like, oh, he's got a better rate than Milton Williams. And I'm like, I'm not sure he's a better pass rusher than Milton Williams. I think that might be the way teams play us. That's just my opinion from watching film. But the Eagles have still got some depth. And at the end of the day, you cannot pay everyone. Part of the thing about when you're good is I think Josh went absolutely mental in the Super Bowl. And you're kidding yourself if you don't think teams around the league take advantage and stuff like that and they watch him. I think the Super Bowl definitely inflated his numbers, and that's the kind of player that the Eagles can't really afford to sign.
Yeah, I would not have brought back either of those players on those deals. I think they're both good players. I'm sad to see them go. I hope they ball out where they went, but these are guys that we said all along the Eagles weren't going to bring back. So no surprise there. Let's talk about... Go ahead.
One more outgoing, isn't there? Got to hit Kenny G. If
a couple
Kenny
of them.
Gainwell, Shane. Who's the other guys? We've got Kenny G and.
Well, we've got. Let's go cornerback first while we're on the defense here. So,
all right, let's do it.
The Eagles lose Isaiah Rodgers, 2 years, $15 million to Minnesota, and then I don't know what's going on with the Slay thing because. Reportedly, he was signing with Pittsburgh, and then it was like, oh, wait, the Eagles haven't cut him yet. Now they're trying to trade him to Pitt. I don't know what's going on there. I will say on the Slay Rodgers thing, I would have kept one of these guys. I don't think I would have let both of these guys go. I would have probably said, let Slay go and keep Rodgers and pay him. Like I would have paid him $7.5 million a year to come probably be your starter unless he just gets beat out by Keely Ringo.
And it's not even starter money, really. You can pay a backup rotational quarterback these days that much money. Like it's not going to ruin your cap or anything.
Yeah. So I would have kept one of these guys. I probably would have made it Rodgers. Slay's a better player than Rodgers, to be clear, but Slay was injured a lot and that fall off comes for guys. So I'm a little disappointed that allegedly, again, I don't know what's going on with Slay, but allegedly both of these guys are out of the building. That is a little disappointing for me. Although I was a huge Keely Ringo fan in the draft. I had a first round grade on him. I think I haven't seen anything on film to walk that back in his NFL career, but the lack of ability to get onto the field and earn the coach's trust maybe makes you waver on that a little bit, but maybe they're going to throw him out there in 2025.
Yeah, I can't imagine Ringo is the starter. I think he might get a chance. I'm surprised about Rodgers as well. I'm just assuming Slay's gone. I think all of this talk about Pittsburgh, my guess is he's gone. I'd find it quite strange if he suddenly came back to the Eagles. I think my issue with cornerback is if you go via the draft, I think you might just be too young. And as much as I love and everyone wants, every fan wants young players everywhere on a defense, I do think culture-wise it helps having a sort of veteran presence in there who can help when things are going wrong. I'm sure if you were to interview Kenyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, they would probably say very wonderful things about how helpful Darius Slay was to them in terms of film study, in terms of being a pro. I think suddenly asking Kenyon, Cooper DeJean at the second year just to be like the guys, and the safeties are hardly particularly experienced at this point either as well, so it's a young secondary. Keely Ringo is an interesting guy, big, physical, compressed, but struggles a lot with like in-breaking stuff, technique stuff, and I think in the Fangio defense, you can mask that a little bit when he's outside, but I think there will come a time and a place where you'll see weaknesses show up. Then Rodgers was really good, just awful at the catch point, and I'm surprised the Eagles didn't match that. Slay was exceptionally good again. He's just old and expensive, and the Eagles maybe wanted to go somewhere else in that position. But Rodgers is the one I'm a little surprised about because my guess would be he would want to come back to the Eagles as well. Because if he takes a 2-year, like $16 million deal or something, basically 1 year guaranteed, if he plays really well for the Eagles, and he's got a very good chance of playing really well for the Eagles because he's playing in a very good secondary for a very good defensive coordinator, then you'd think he's only 27 years old. He's in line for another contract, like a year after. But he obviously decided, and the Eagles decided not to keep him. I think the weirdest one of all of them is Oren Burks. Sorry to jump around with defense a bit, but that one I'm a little bit bemused on. Like, I don't really care if you really like Jeremiah Trotter. It was like a 2-year, $5 million deal?
Yeah,
like,
Cincinnati.
It's utterly like nothing. The free agency is so funny because you can pay insane amounts of money for players and then get some like ridiculously cheap. Like, I'm stunned that Oren Burks signed before free agency is even open. for a 2-year, $5 million deal. Like, that's just, it seems very low for him. and he was legitimately good towards the end of the Eagles run. And I know there's a lot of comments about Burks wants to start. Why is he not starting here? Like, are we just all assuming that the Kobe Dean's going to fly back instantly and be ready week 1? Like, I think he's the starter. And dare I say, if Oren Burks starts the season and plays extremely well, he doesn't have to get benched for the Kobe Dean coming off an injury. The Kobe Dean is a very good player and he played very well last year, but I don't think he's this like unmovable force. The Kobe Dean's back now. Well, Oren Burks, you've been really good for first 4 weeks of the season, but now the Kobe Dean's back, we just don't have any use for you at all. Like, I find that really odd. So I'm quite surprised, in all honesty, that Oren Burks was gone. I don't know how you feel about that one as well, but that was the one that surprised me more than anything.
Yeah, I would be. It surprised me more than anything, but opening Twitter to find out Chauncey Gardner-Johnson was traded. But
yeah, and just so I'm coming back at this, just because T. Grant, it's a fair point. You're saying like, sure, but why not take the sure thing in Cincy? I just don't think a 2-year, $5 million contract is a sure thing anywhere. Like, I'm not saying Cincinnati will, but we don't know what they're going to draft. They might draft some linebackers in early still. They might end up playing the rookies. Like, I don't think anyone that signs a 2-year, $5 million deal starter, money, should ever basically think they're taking a starting job, because I just don't think we basically know that. I mean, it's very early on, but the Owlad's depth chart has him as third for the Cincinnati Bengals currently. Like, I just don't buy when you get that contract, you're walking in to a guaranteed starting gig. And I also think, as GGN10 just said, he's awesome on special teams. So I'm surprised the Eagles didn't throw a few million at him just for special teams. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the Eagles just didn't bother at all. Maybe everyone's right and he did just desperately go to start. As T. Grant said, I'd be shocked if how he didn't match, but I don't really get why you wouldn't go like 2 years, $6 million, 2 years, $7 million, and give yourself a little bit of concern. Maybe they really, really are high Jeremiah Trotter Jr. and like awesome if that's the case. But I think it's a bit of an unnecessary risk. I feel like you can raise your floor as a team by keeping guys around like Oren Burks. And I feel like he's an easy one to just get sorted and not worry about next year. But there you go. These things happen.
Yeah, I would have kept Burks, and I think it's so much of a no-brainer that it makes me feel like he just decided to go to Cincinnati for whatever reason. And maybe it's the Trotter / Nakobe Dean of it all. I don't know, but I would have liked to have kept him because I think he raises your floor, like you said, of the position group as a whole. And he's a good special teamer. So I would have kept him. I was surprised that he was gone, and it makes me think that it was probably his decision, not the Eagles.
Yeah, and if maybe I'm misreading the Kobe Dean injury, but from what I've read, I don't think his agent has basically did him any favors, Oren Burks. If he left because he's guaranteed to go, then because he's guaranteed to start, like maybe I'm wrong, but the stuff I've read about the Kobe Dean, he's not great. And they were talking about possibly missing all of next year. And as I said, even if he comes back, the Kobe Dean's been injured a hell of a lot. So don't get me wrong, I'm a huge Jeremiah Trotter Jr. fan. We just haven't seen it. So I don't think there's anything wrong with having all four of them. But, maybe I've just missed linebackers for so long that I now want every possible linebacker that exists.
Jonny wants all the linebackers. Per Jonny's sources, the Eagles are after Fred Warner, too. The 49ers are tearing it down. Bring him in.
It's pretty incredible, isn't it, to lose Rodgers, Slay, Milton Williams, Josh Sweat, Oren Burks, and
Chauncey Gardner-Johnson.
Starting safety. Yeah, that's a lot of work to do. Maybe we'll save that for another show when we're talking about prospects and stuff. Right, should we hit the final one then, I believe, which is Kenny Gainwell.
So Kenny Gainwell, 1-year deal to the Steelers. The terms
no
of
money
the
announced.
Yeah, no money announced, which means it's not very good, or the agent would have already put it out there. So 100%. That's another one I'm a little surprised, assuming it's a 1-year, $2 million deal or something like that. I'm surprised the Eagles wouldn't bring him back at that number either, because they seem to really like him. And it's not like
may go for playing time though. He is one that may genuinely see a starting option in Pittsburgh, but then they might draft someone in the second round. So who the hell knows?
I don't think he would start over Jaylen Warren, but he's probably got more of a pathway to a rotation than he does behind Saquon Barkley. So I would have loved to have seen Kenny Gainwell back as well, because I think he gets a lot of hate from Eagles fans. That's unwarranted. He's a solid pass protector, solid in the passing game. Solid. He's not spectacular, but he's a playable part of a rotation. And don't love that Will Shipley's the only guy behind Saquon right now. So you're going to have to invest into that position too. I would have rather it just been a guy that was already in the building that you've seen in the system.
Yeah, we'll save that for the running back show. But I've got some eyes on the running backs this year. I've watched a lot of them. It's a very interesting day 3 class. Backup running back is an important position, by the way, because the Eagles offense is so centered about the run. I don't think you can just say Saquon's out, we'll throw the ball 50 times. Like, I don't think that's how the offense should work. There are some guys later on in this draft. I would expect them to look again around the 4th round and then let someone compete with Will Shipley. But I'm just a little surprised because, again, it felt like an easy one to do. But yeah, we'll get into the running backs another day. Anything else you wanted to hit in terms of people leaving or big picture before we talk about the amazing one player that the Eagles added? The reason we're all here, Mr. Kenyon Green. So should we get into some Kenyon Green stuff?
Only if we have to.
Only if we have to. Yeah, Shane hates Kenyon Green, by the way. I thought I was like, yeah, there's a little bit there. There's a little bit of juice. And Shane's messaging me like, this guy sucks. The problem was, right, is I watched week 1 first, and I told you not to watch week 1. And the first literally play I saw, or the second play I saw, is him just flatten a linebacker, defensive back. And I was like, wow, we've done it. We've done it. PFF's wrong. We all know PFF grading sucks. This guy's actually legit.
I saw you post this play, by the way, and then I was looking for this on the film of the 2 games I watched, and I was like, oh, it just doesn't exist in these games.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. You also, when you watch the film, and that's the first play out there, for the Twitter likes and the retweets, you got to shove that one as a first play. That's going to get some views. When everyone on Twitter's quote tweeting me going, oh my God, Stoutland's done it again. What's scouting? And I'm like, yeah, let's just pretend every rep's like this. He can hit in the second level. I'm saying nothing about Jeff Stoutland. I think Jeff Stoutland might be able to make us into suitable offensive linemen. But Giants Warmack, Andre Dillard's, it's not always easy out there. So what did you think about Kenyon Green? Should we start with just profile? Do we even bother getting into how bad the numbers are? I feel like everyone who listens to this show, who's followed any news, knows his numbers are horrendous. Yeah. PFF hate him. Gives up a ton of pressure. Pass blocking grades, rubbish. Run blocking grades, rubbish. Anything else I need to really say?
Yeah, I mean, so I watched the Jags game, and what was the other game I watched? It was the Jags and the Bills game. And my takeaway from him is that he's a pretty poor pass blocker. And if he loses his initial engagement, he has almost no chance of recovery. He plays with a really poor base. He routinely stumbles or is off balance. Like I said at one point, I tweeted a clip and I said, I would suggest you not play a drinking game and make one of the triggers Kenyon Green stumbling, because you'll never make it. So he gets put on skates a lot. He's at his best on the move in the run game, particularly, I think, on trap or kick out blocks, which are easy blocks to make if you're athletic, because you're just trying to get that initial knockback. You don't really have to sustain the block. And I think he really struggles to sustain blocks. And so he hits with power, but he just doesn't sustain blocks. Like there was a play that I watched where, and I'll try to find it while you talk for a second, where he hits the defensive tackle and knocks him back like 3 yards and then just lets him shed. And it's a tackle for like a 1 yard gain anyways, because he doesn't sustain the block. And theoretically, he would be good moving on the second level, but a lot of times I just saw him completely whiff blocks at the second level. Like they'd try to get him climbing. And so when the move was initially made, I was like, we're going to try to ask him to move to right guard and all this stuff. And then after watching it, I was like, yeah, I think he's just a throw in depth piece. I don't think there's any intention of him being the starting right guard next year.
Yeah, someone made a good point on my Bidding Green article, actually, because I said that I don't understand why you'd move him to right guard, and I don't think they will, for what it's worth. But someone did say, when your film is that bad at left guard, maybe you just kick him out to a different side to try and get rid of all his bad habits. And I thought it's actually not the worst idea in the world. But the idea they're going to be sticking him at right guard to compete or like start, I think is not true. I imagine they'll just play him wherever they think he is better suited. I said the same as you. I think he's quite good in outside zone as well. The Eagles were not really an outside zone heavy team last year. I would say he's very different to Mekhi Becton. Someone commented saying he looks like a fullback. And I was like, actually, I can see him as a little swing tackle fullback type guy, because he moves really well. It's just he doesn't do anything well with his movement, if that makes sense. So you can see the tools, but that's like going to get any athlete in the world and saying, just stick them at guard because they can move. Like, he's just not very good at the actual part of blocking, which being an offensive lineman is less than ideal. So in terms of like weaknesses, like you mentioned most of the key things, he's rocked back all the time. He cannot anchor. The base is wide. The hands are all over the place. He's uncoordinated quite a lot of the time. Even when he gets a strong initial punch, like he just doesn't have the ability to sustain the block. And if he doesn't land a strong punch, he's dead within a second because he just doesn't seem to have any way of recovering. I described him in the article as everything looks like slow motion. And my favorite quote from the article, if I do say so myself, was every rep feels like a journey. That's how I would describe his film. Like, even when he wins, it's like, this is hard work for this guy. Everything's tough. Nothing's coordinated. Nothing's controlled. There's wrestling involved. He looks like he's like physically struggling to block the guy rather than like effortlessly winning. There's just a lot of issues in pass protection. The running game's okay. There are times when he just absolutely whiffs on the guy, as you mentioned. And I mean, like, just completely whiffs, like gets to the second level and just completely misses the guy, which is always quite bemusing to me. But he does move well. He does have good quickness. You can see that like pop, what I say, in the run game, almost like that jolt where he jars them. I think if he's not blocking anyone, he's quite active in pass protection in terms of like scanning left and right, and he's quite quick. And there's a couple of plays I saw where, because his pop's quite powerful, when there's like an adjacent rusher coming from like a stunt or something, he can handle it. But the good reps in pass protection are few and far between. This is a guy that needs a lot of work. And I mean, like a complete retooling of how he plays the position in pass protection. And that's obviously a risk. But at the end of the day, the Eagles didn't trade Chauncey Gardner-Johnson to get him. I think he was just a throw-in. Jeff Stoutland probably gets bored at this point, and he probably said, give me someone interesting to work on. I've been doing this for a while. And if he can make Kenyon Green into a serviceable player, then awesome. But if I was writing a depth chart tomorrow, I'd stick him behind Tyler Steen. I'd stick him behind Trevor Keegan as well. Like, I think the film is pretty rough. The only thing I would say in his favor is the Texans' offensive line is an absolute train wreck, or was a train wreck. And I'm so glad I didn't watch the Texans film last year because it's brutal. And I just don't think any of those guys were coached well. So he's obviously got talent. He's an early round pick. Stick him in the room with Jeff Stoutland and maybe he figures things out. But there's not much to get too excited about at this point.
Yeah. Question for you, Jonny.
Yep.
Would you be more surprised if Kenyon Green is the starting right guard week 1 next year, or if he doesn't make the 53-man roster?
Doesn't make the roster. Yeah, okay. I would. If he beats out Tyler Steen, that would be a serious improvement because Steen's been in the system for 2 years at this point as well, and has proven that he can play. I don't even like Steen that much, unfortunately, last year. I didn't like him that much in what I watched, but I did like him prior to that year when he played in minimal times. But yeah, I like Trevor Keegan coming out as well. So who knows? I would be a little bit surprised.
Yeah.
If he starts, I feel as well, more than a little bit surprised, actually. Very surprised if he starts for the Eagles. I'm very worried.
I feel like this is the quintessential. People are like, he's a good run blocker. And I feel like this is the quintessential Kenyon Green blocking rep. Yeah, he gets to the second level to a linebacker unimpeded because the guy walks down into the gap and he makes contact and pushes him like 5 yards backwards. And then he just gets shed and his guy makes the tackle anyways. Like, that's kind of what I saw a lot. He cannot sustain blocks. Sustained.
He's like the anti, was it Isaac Sayamalu, who no one ever seemed to think was outstanding because there was no big highlight blocks. Whereas Mekhi Becton has like a highlight block every 2 weeks. He'll give you some highlight blocks, but he's just not consistently good on a down basis. So there you go. Do you think that sums up the Kenyon Green incredibly detailed, in-depth, that everyone wants film review? I think that's all I've got on Kenyon Green. Anything else you want to throw in there about him?
No, I think that's really it. Jonny and I both put out film threads on him. So if you want, we watched 2 separate games. So if you want to watch any of it,
well. Yeah.
So and Jonny has an article out on Bleeding Green Nation. So you can go check those out. Do what?
If you really want more Kenyon Green, fair enough, go for it. but I'm not sure you need to see too much yet. Let's wait and see. If we see some good things in summer, if we hear good things about him, then maybe we'll check back in and see how things are going. But yeah, I wouldn't expect him to do a lot next year.
Yeah. So there you have it. Jonny, shall we throw it around and take a quick look at what the other teams in the division have been up to?
Do it quickly. You can summarize what they've done and I'll give some thoughts because I haven't got anything in front of me.
Okay. Let's start with Washington because I think they're the biggest competition at this point. The biggest move is trading for Laramie Tunsil. They gave up a 3rd and 7th round pick this year and a 2nd and 4th round pick next year. They're all in. They have a quarterback and they're trying to take advantage of the window. Tunsil had a 3% pressure rate last season. I'm not sure why the Texans think the answer to having one of the worst O-lines in the league is to trade really good left tackle. But that's what they did. I thought this is a really good move for the Commanders to shore up that protection. What were your thoughts on the Tunsil trade?
I have no idea what the Texans are doing. I think he's a very, very, very good player, and I think he makes them significantly better. I'd love to say bad things about him, but whenever I watch him, I think he's an extremely good pass protector. His footwork in particular always stands out, was just an incredibly coordinated looking athlete. So, he makes him better. Absolutely makes him better. Like no two ways around it. And they got him for a pretty good deal as well. And he's not exactly that old. So as far as tackles go, 30 years old, he's got a few years left. Yeah, that's, in my opinion, a no-brainer. And I don't really get what the Texans are doing. I know there's those stats going out there. He had like 7 penalties. I'm like, yeah, but that doesn't really tell you. There's a lot of context to those things. Maybe he holds a little bit, but I think he's still a very good player.
Yeah. Okay. They also, this is a little bit older, but they traded for Deebo Samuel for a 5th, which I think Deebo Samuel is washed, but it's basically a no-cost move when you're talking about a 5th round pick.
And he can, in their offense, he should be like an absolute dream of a fit. I just think he's an idiot and possibly not very good anymore. But I still don't think it's the worst move in the world, to be honest with you, for that price. Although I'm surprised they let De'Ami Brown go as well. Because I thought he was a useful like wide receiver 4, wide receiver 3 type.
Yeah. Will Harris, safety, they signed 2 years, $8 million, kind of as a replacement for Jeremy Chin. And then Javon Kinlaw, they signed to a 3-year, $45 million deal, which is basically what Jonathan Allen was set to make. He was going to make $15.5 million. Allen's the better player. I don't really love Javon Kinlaw. I didn't really care for that move for them. But I did like the Will Harris move. I mean, I think he's a solid player at that price. I would like him to be in midnight green now that the Eagles got rid of Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. But overall, I feel like I like what the Commanders have done. I just wasn't crazy about the Kinlaw move.
Yes, I agree. When you lose Jonathan Allen, that's obviously a big deal. But I think Laramie Tunsil is a big move. And I think they were pretty good. They brought back Zach Ertz as well. I think that's a no-brainer. I think although he's obviously getting on a bit, he is still very sort of efficient. And I think what he doesn't require great athleticism. Tight ends can play till they're old if they know how to get open. And Zach Ertz is one of those guys that will just always come up with a big catch in the red zone or on like 3rd and 6. So I think Washington's going to be a threat next year. In terms of what I don't want them to do, in terms of draft stuff, I'm really looking out for them to add like a really explosive running back. I think they would want to do, and I think their offense is pretty good if they can get like a really top young back. So I'm hoping they don't address that position, but we'll see. But I think they're going to be a threat next year. They're going to be a good team, and Tunsil seemed like a no-brainer, in all honesty.
Yeah, they also brought back Bobby Wagner, by the way. But okay, let's go to the Giants, who this one. Twitter can have a lot of fun with this one because they signed Darius Slayton to a 3-year, $36 million deal after they let Saquon out of the building for 3 years, $38 million. So
bizarre signing.
Javon Holland, 3 years, $45 million. I love Javon Holland, but they let Xavier McKinney out of the building last year for less than $2 million a year more. So, I mean, I love Javon Holland, but I don't know what they were doing last year, and we shouldn't grade this year's free agency off of last year. But so I like Holland. They also added Paulson Adebo, 3 years, $54 million. And I love Paulson Adebo. I liked him in his draft. I think he's been underrated in New Orleans for years because New Orleans has not been very good. and Marshawn Lattimore got the press for being good in the secondary there, but he has 7 picks and 28 pass breakups over the last 2 years. He is coming off of a broken leg, but I like what they did in their secondary with Adebo and Holland. Other than that, I don't really make too much of anything that the Giants have done.
They're just so far away, aren't they? Like, even when they had good players, they're so far away. I think one of the best things they've done is just not somehow carry on with the ridiculous Daniel Jones fiasco. And imagine being a Colts fan, man. Anthony Richardson, Daniel Jones. Like, oh, that's a rough competition. That is a rough competition. But I think all you would say about the Giants is it's a full reset. They basically, as you said, don't have a quarterback. I think the best thing I would say for the Giants is they didn't go out there and get a terrible quarterback. Like, I think the worst thing in the world they could have done would be like pay Aaron Rodgers and be like, we're going to somehow do this, or go and get like a Derek Carr type guy. And I think in some ways I think maybe they're going about it the right way now, finally. I don't really get the Slayton move. In all honesty, I think half the time Slayton ends up on the bench for them. Then some weeks they love him, some weeks they hate him. But I think they got better. And I think the best thing they could do now is just take it very slow, not really compete next year, and either get a rookie quarterback this year or even basically tank and hang on for the year after. As an Eagles fan, what I'm hoping they do is go and pay like a very average vet quarterback a lot of money. But so far, I think they've done a good job avoiding that sort of market, because that market rarely seems to come off.
Yeah, Darius Slayton coming off a 573-yard, 2-touchdown year. You really can't let that get out of the building. Never had. I think he's fine, but he's never had a 775-yard season. So, I think, like you said, the worst thing they could do would have been in on like an Aaron Rodgers sort of thing. I think them trading up for like Cam Ward would have been bad, and not just because I don't love Cam Ward, but they're just kind of stuck, and it's going to take them some time. Yeah,
they're a long time away from competing, in my opinion. But depends what to do at QB, I guess. If the rookie QB is outstanding, maybe they can turn it around. But they're just very talent deficient, aren't they? They just haven't got enough talented players to compete. Speaking of not having enough talented players to compete, Shane, what did the Dallas Cowboys do?
So the big thing they did early on was signing Osa Odigizua, re-signing him to a 4-year, $80 million deal. I like Osa. He was second in pressure rate, second in defensive tackle pressures last year. He's not very good against the run, but I like him as a pass rusher on the interior.
It's a good job when you compare it to Milton Williams' contract.
Yes.
They actually made a right decision getting in there early, and I wonder if he's calling his agent saying, wonder if we should hit free agency, but there you go.
Yeah. And then outside of that, I think the most noteworthy thing they did was signing Javonte Williams, 1 year, $3 million. He hasn't been the same player since his knee injury in 2020 as a rookie, but I liked him a lot as a player. I think he makes sense to bring in on a cheap deal. I don't think he's going to do a lot for him, but I think it makes sense as a signing given where their running back room is.
It makes sense because they've gone from one old, previously injured player in Zeke to another one. And I love Javonte like everyone coming out, but just not the same guy. A couple of comments saying they just traded in for Kyle Elam. Is that for the Bills they got him off of?
Yeah.
He was, I'm sure I really liked him coming out, but he just never lived up, did he?
No.
To his potential. And I guess he was like, I remember watching him quite a lot, actually. He was like very long and very fast, but not particularly good. And he ended up still not really being great. But he's a talented guy. I'll find that my old draft report him at some point off there for the Patreon. But he is quite talented. I'm pretty sure I had quite a high grade on him in that year because I'm a sucker for like those 6'2", 190 long cornerbacks that run below a 4.4. They're my type. But I think he was pretty raw then, and I still think he's never really done it, has he?
No, not really. I was going to see if I could dig mine up, and I'm not sure. That was that the 2022 draft? I think it was.
Yeah, it's a race to see who can find their notes as quick as possible. But
he was number 28 on my big board, but I'm not sure that I actually have my written scouting report from him that year.
I will have it. 2022. Let's do this for the sickos listening. You're like, what is Kyle Elam's scouting report? You had him
2022 is the year that I lost. I have 2023 on.
I had him late first round pick. I said he was long, runs really well, great frame, great size, good length, good competitive, high level physicality, a classic boundary corner, good press, good ball production, but extremely grabby. Flagged 7 times in 10 games the prior year. Will be a flag machine in the NFL if he doesn't cut that out. And I wonder actually if you've got PFF up, how many times he does give it up. A little slow breaking on the ball, lacks that elite twitch that you want to see from cornerbacks. I said he profiles as the classic cornerback that everyone wanted to see years ago when everyone was playing cover 3. Like outside length, outside frame, physicality, but grabby, way too grabby. Not great in the run game. I said he seems to split opinion. I don't think he's good enough to be where people are drafting him in the mid-first round, but I think it's worth a dart in the end of the first. So I wasn't hugely high on him, but I also could see the potential. I think he's like another one of those corners, like long, fast, length, but don't actually play that well. And I think that's what he's turned out to be as well. He went just around like Andrew Booth, didn't he? And I think they've both been like really similar in terms of just not worked in that draft at the end of the first.
Yeah, he was my CB5 in that draft. Looks like he has been flagged 9 times over the last 3 seasons.
Yeah,
he's not been good. He's been benched intermittently in Buffalo. He's been bad.
Yeah, he's not being good. I am in his cornerback 5 as well. There you go. He must have been similar. Yeah, I wasn't a particularly big. I think I'm a sucker for long, tall, rangy cornerbacks, so I liked him in that sense. But I think my notes are pretty clear that he was nowhere near as good as maybe the physical profile suggested. Right. Anything else on the NFC East you wanted to hit, or should we wrap up? We got a couple of questions from throughout. I'll hit very quickly.
2 things we didn't mention with the Eagles.
Oh, yes, there is one.
The Eagles traded Kenny Pickett. They got a pick swap. I think it was a 6th for a 5th, and swapped Kenny Pickett for Dorian Thompson-Robinson. I love it because Tanner McKee is a better quarterback than Kenny Pickett anyways, so that gets him to QB2. The Eagles move up around in the draft, and they get a guy that was intriguing. DTR's film in Cleveland is horrible, and he's probably just bad. But he'll be fun to watch in a preseason game. And it's interesting because I've always talked about how you want your backup to have like a similar skill set to your quarterback, your starter, in case he goes down. You don't have to change the offense. And McKee doesn't have that. And we saw all of like the bootlegs and stuff when McKee started. But what McKee has that Hurts has is that anticipatory throwing outside the numbers. And then, of course, DTR has the mobility. And so you get him for 2 years versus taking Pickett into the final year of his deal. So I liked that move. What were your thoughts on that trade?
I mean, couldn't not like the move. So I don't really care for DTR. I don't think he's very good at all, but he might be some fun in preseason, which when I'm watching preseason film, any fun in the world I can get will do me. And it made absolutely no sense to keep Kenny Pickett as QB2. And I jokingly tweeted about this. Even when Howie makes like a bad move, he ends up somehow saving it as well. I don't really know why. The Browns wanted Kenny Pickett, but go for it. Enjoy Deshaun Watson and Kenny Pickett, Cleveland. But at least Myles Garrett is ready to compete there and had nothing to do with the money when he signed back. It was all Kenny Pickett. He knew that Kenny Pickett was incoming, and that fulfilled his competitive spirit, and he's ready to rock now. And yeah, the other move I guess you want to talk about is Dallas Goedert.
Yeah.
Can I just basically say I don't understand any of the Dallas Goedert thing at all? Like I've read a lot about it. Jimbo's been talking about the cap. His cap seems pretty good. I don't see if you're competing why you trade him. I think you need another tight end to compete with him. I just don't see why you'd get rid of him. I'd totally be on board with going to get like Michael Mayer or drafting someone or signing someone. Like I just don't really understand why they are doing it. Maybe he's kicking off. Maybe he wants a lot more money and he thinks he'll get it elsewhere. I think he's underused by the Eagles because of the way our offense is constructed, but he's also hurt every other week, so he can't complain too much. So I don't really get the Dallas Goedert thing. I'll be honest. I'd love to give you some great analysis about what I think. I don't. All I would say is if they do lose Dallas Goedert, there is an absolutely ginormous need at tight end because you don't find many that can block and catch as well as him. On talent alone, as we've said, he's a top 5 tight end, and rookie tight ends sort of suck when they first come into the league. And the Eagles aren't going to suddenly go and take one in the top 15 or something. So if you get rid of Goddard, you've got a seriously big hole there, and you're going to have to make a proper signing or go and get someone legit, because you can't open up a Super Bowl window team next year with Grant Calcaterra as your tight end one. Like, that's some nonsense. Tight end's an important position. Tight end one's a really important position. So if you're going to get rid of Goddard, I want to see another big move that's not trade for Kyle Pitts and hope he's good. That's not. I want to see like an actual proper tight end in here. I wouldn't do it. I don't really get the rumor at all, but it's pretty consistently out there. So who knows?
Yeah, Dallas Goedert averaged 2.2 yards per route run from 11 personnel last season, which was second most among qualifying tight ends. The Eagles also averaged 6.3 yards per carry with Goddard on the field, compared to 4.9 without him. So he makes a big difference in the run game. He's good in limited reps in the passing game. And it basically comes down to, like, because he has an option that's due before the 2025 season, the Eagles can essentially save $15.5 million if they move on from him. Now, that's not 2025 cap savings. That's over the period of, by the time all of the dead cap comes off the book, they would save about $15.5 million, something in that vicinity. To me, it's just worth that. You're in a Super Bowl window. Go win the Super Bowl again, and then let him walk in free agency. Maybe you get a comp pick for him next year. And, you know, I've heard people, well, maybe Goddard just doesn't want to play on that deal. I think Goddard will suck it up and play on that deal, because that option bonus basically makes him like the second highest paid tight end in the NFL for a season. And he's not the second best tight end in the NFL. Nope. So he would be crazy to hold out with that kind of money on the table. So the best thing for him to do would be to go ball out this season and make a bunch of money and try to go somewhere else in free agency. And to me, this would be the move that if the Eagles did it, I don't understand. And I would start to get concerned that we're worrying about 7 years from now more than we're worrying about the next 2 or 3 years. So this is the one that's a bridge too far for me.
It's also not like a binary cap savings, because you're going to have to replace him. Like, you can't just draft the guy and be like, this is the guy that's going to, like, no, not when you're in this window. You're going to have to actually go and sign someone or trade for someone who's already on a contract. So it's going to cost you money. Like, I don't get it at all, in all honesty. I think more than anything, people talk about his receiving talent. Like, his run blocking is awesome, and this is a team that wants to run the hell out of the ball. Like, do you need a good tight end to run block? Part of the Eagles' run game collapsed at times last year was because the tight ends could not block. So you can't just roll out Grant Calcaterra and CJ Uzomah. Like, it's not even like they have like a young tight end in the wings, like a Ben Sinnott at Washington, where you're like, oh, you know, talented guy, didn't do it as a rookie. There's just not really anyone else there. Like, I don't get it.
You also can't trade for Kyle Pitts because he's a big receiver. He's got no clue how to block. So.
That's what I mean. Like, it doesn't fit. I've just seen that floated out. I've just seen that floated online. I think it's nonsense. Right, Shane, any final thoughts? Or I might just very quickly just waffle through a very couple of quick comments, and then we'll get out of here very quickly.
Go for it.
Right, we've got Eagles Eric. Interest in Gilmore. I assume he's talking about the quarterback. Or why the hell not? It goes to my point earlier on about, I think, mainly the veteran presence in the room. I don't think you have to guarantee him a starting deal, but I imagine you let him compete with Ringo. I would be on board with that, and wouldn't be my first choice, but I'd be okay with it. How about yourself?
Yeah, sure, whatever. I would like for Kelee Ringo to win that job. I would like for them not to just give it to Kelee Ringo. Competition's always good, and I don't see the competition in the room right now. So sure.
Yeah, a couple of other comments I liked. I don't know if this is true. I should have checked this before I just splash out a comment saying. Milton Williams was the highest paid player in New England history. Can that be true? Could that be the biggest contract?
Probably, considering they were circumventing the salary cap by paying Tom Brady under the table for years. Yeah.
Then we've had a few comments about quarterback 2. I think we've addressed that. Matt made a good comment saying that Rube's article, I'm guessing he's talking about Ruben Frank, talking about the Eagles are not rebuilding but learning from past mistakes and getting past players. And I'm totally on board with that. Just don't believe that essentially you can go and get a bunch of young players and still try and be really competitive. Yako Walnut, is Justin Simmons still available? That's all over everywhere at the moment, isn't it? He seems like he wants to be here. He seems like he wanted to be here for years. He obviously loves playing in Fangio's defense. That feels like there's probably a reasonable chance that happens, but I also thought that I've felt that many a time and it never has happened before. So
Am I making this up, or did I read somewhere like last year when this whole thing happened about how like he and Fangio might have had some issues when
Who
they
knows?
were together in the
He's
past?
gone on podcast of late, hasn't he? And literally said that he basically wants to be there.
Okay. Well, there you go.
He was literally, I think I'll try and find the quotes. He was on a podcast and he said, would Philadelphia Eagles be a dream landing spot for that? He was on the Talking Ball podcast with Pat Leonard, and he said, having the chance to reunite with Vic and also the defensive back coach, Christian Parker, he's over there. I worked with him the last maybe 4 years in Denver. He was a huge piece of rotating coaches, defensive coordinators, huge stability. There's a lot of good things about Philly. Obviously, their offense is incredibly talented. What the defense did last season, blah, blah, blah. So to have an opportunity to go and play in Philly, especially reuniting with Vic and CP, is high on the list. Okay. So, I mean,
I made that up.
32.
I was thinking of the whole Javon Holland thing. Never mind.
You're thinking of Javon Holland. Javon Holland hates Fangio. Like, it's funny that this article I'm reading says it wouldn't make sense as an offense if it blocks Sidney Brown from playing time. And I'm like, yeah, screw that. Like, let him compete. I don't think you have to go into next season going Sidney Brown has to be the guy. So, yes, Simmons makes sense to me. There was one other comment I'm sure I wanted to get to, but in true style, we've got a load today. So I'm frantically flicking through. Oh, let's end with a random one then, shall we? Right at the start, T. Grant, literally an hour ago, if he's even still listening. If not, let's listen back. What's it like being a British American football fan? Yeah, basically very strange because we always record at different times and things like free agency and the draft are terrible because everything happens overnight. So free agency is a disaster because I'm constantly like, there's a bit of a joke in the Discord that I'm never online at the moment because at the moment I'm working all the time when all these moves are going down in the middle of the day, and it's like it can be a pain. But no one takes the mickey. Someone said that people like make fun of you. No, it's a massive growing interest. It's a huge thing, so it's only going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So you will hear more British guys in podcasts soon, but hopefully not too many. So I've still got a little bit of a niche thing there. And he's still there. T. Grant is still there. What a legend. Bang on an hour, Shane. We said we'll be 45 minutes, and of course we're not. So shall I leave you to wrap things up there before I go through any more comments?
Yeah, no, that's it. I'll bring it home here. So that's about it. This isn't last year where we're breaking down Bryce Huff and Saquon Barkley and a flurry of moves, but I do think it's interesting. Nevertheless, I don't think you're going to see the Eagles making moves. I don't think they're going to make moves that'll cancel comp picks, which means they're going to sign really small deals that won't cancel those out, or they're going to sign guys that got cut and thus won't cancel out comp picks, or they're going to wait till after the draft when comp picks are no longer factored into signings. I do think, I'll leave people with this, the longer Mekhi Becton is on the market, the more likely he's back in Philly, because the guard offensive line contracts were insane. And the fact that Mekhi Becton didn't get a big contract and is still sitting out there makes me think the market's just probably not materializing for him. So I could be wrong. Some team could get desperate, but I think the longer he's there, the more likely he's back in Philly.
Yeah, did you ever think about blocking Kenyon Green's pathway though, Shane? Did you consider that when talking about Mekhi Becton coming back? You got to think about Kenyon Green's pathway, Shane.
Yeah.
You don't want those players that block those young, athletic, former first-round picks. So
I want to put as many roadblocks in their way as possible and let them go earn it, just like Cooper DeJean did.
Yeah, roadblocks galore. I don't think we need to worry too much about that. I think Beckham still maybe will be back, but I think it will depend on the market, won't it?
Yeah. All right, so that's going to do it for this week's episode of On the Shane Page. If you're not a part of our Patreon community, please consider checking that out. It's a direct way that you can support our work and make us to be able to continue to do so. We offer a lot of great perks. There's a Discord that we chat in all the time. We post exclusive film stuff to the Patreon. We do mailbag episodes, which we'll have one of those coming up later this month for Patreon. And you get ad-free versions of this podcast, some creative control of the podcast feed. So please consider checking that out. There's a $3 and a $5 a month tier, and you can check either one out with a free 1-week trial. So patreon.com/ontheshane page. And other than that, 5-star ratings and reviews on the Eagles Pinpool Network podcast feed really help us get the show out there to more people. We greatly appreciate you guys' support. 1,000 of you guys tuning in live to this show at 2:00 on a work day when the Eagles aren't doing anything in free agency. We appreciate you guys all, and we will catch you next week for another episode.